Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I'm a Vietnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channel, and of course news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines: wildfire evacuation orders in different parts of Canada. Major shakeup in Russian army after Ukraine attack in Russian territory. The whole world is criticizing Israel for his actions in Gaza. Family reunion. Lots of Americans using apps for paycheck, between paycheck. Feelings of motherhood with children and without children. And adoptions. Animals in Ukraine and Russian attacks. Kharkiv, Russians and civilians. Big kidney transfer patient died. Roger Corman, a film producer, died. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, why millions of Americans are using apps to get paid between paychecks. Then what motherhood means to people with children, without children, and those somewhere in between.
I think that the word mother is such a tiny word for such a large job, and that there are many ways that we are mothered, and that there are many different types of mothers out there.
And a new film documents the toll the Russian invasion has taken on animals in Ukraine.
Major foundation from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Tonight, Israeli forces are again fighting Palestinian militants in northern Gaza, an area the military said it had cleared months ago. But Israel's earlier operations there left a security vacuum, and Hamas has taken advantage of it to regroup. In southern Gaza, Israel further expanded operations. The military describes what it's doing now as targeted and precise, not the all-out offensive it's been promising. And today was Memorial Day in Israel, the first official commemoration of fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism since the October 7th attacks killed about 1,100 Israelis, most of them civilians. In Gaza, the Hamas-run health ministry says 35,000 Palestinians have died since the start of the war. They don't distinguish between civilians and fighters. Russia says part of a 10-story apartment building in the border city of Belgorod collapsed under Ukrainian shelling. At least 8 people were killed and 20 others were hurt. In the Kharkiv region of northeastern Ukraine, Russia continues to gain ground, forcing thousands more civilians to flee. Moscow says Russia has taken 4 more villages surrounding Kharkiv. That makes a total of 9 this weekend. Ukraine says Russian advances have forced the withdrawal of at least 1 battalion. The first person to receive a transplanted, genetically modified pig kidney has died nearly 2 months after undergoing the procedure. Rick Slayman's family said the groundbreaking animal-to-human transplant gave hope to thousands of people on the waiting list for a human organ transplant. Every year, thousands die before an organ becomes available. Doctors said they didn't have any indication that the 62-year-old Slayman died as a result of the transplant. And filmmaker Roger Corman has died. You may not know the name, but you probably know the careers he helped launch. Corman was known as King of the Bees, directing about 50 low-budget films and producing 300 more. They include the cult classics Little Shop of Horrors and The Attack of the Crab Monsters. He nurtured the early careers of Jack Nicholson, Ellen Burstyn, and Robert De Niro. He gave early opportunities to aspiring directors like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Ron Howard. Some of them gave Corman small roles in their later films, including Silence of the Lambs and Apollo 13. Corman received an honorary Oscar in 2009. Roger Corman was 98 years old. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, what motherhood means to those with children and without children, and how Russia's invasion has affected Ukraine's animals.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
2 years of high prices for everything from groceries to gasoline have left some people struggling to get by until their next payday. To help, some are turning to what are called earned wage access apps, which offer small short-term loans until the next paycheck. Proponents say they help people with low incomes manage their finances. Critics say they can lead to a cycle of overspending and borrowing, and that the costs aren't always clear. We spoke to people who use these apps.
My name is Sherry Wilkins. I was working as a home health aide, and using the app DailyPay, I would need something at the grocery store, trying to get food and trying to do that and this, and I have a pet, so, I have expenses that had to be taken care of immediately.
My name is Anna Branch. Honestly, I was, like most Americans, working paycheck to paycheck, scrolling on the internet, and to me, it sounded like a no-brainer. Payday hasn't come. I need some money. They'll give me some money, and then I just have to pay it back.
I probably spent $300 and something a month on transfer fees alone.
Every 2 weeks, I just have to keep borrowing to pay back, and it kind of just turned into one of those cycles.
You become so dependent on that daily money that you don't look at the broader picture of when you need the money to pay your rent or utilities.
Once you start getting into that habit, it kind of feels like a trap and something that's never ending. This is not working the way that y'all said it was going to work. I'm still trying to pay y'all back and stop paying y'all at some point so I can have this money not keep coming out of my account.
According to a financial services research firm, in the 3 years between 2018 and 2020, transactions on these apps went from $3.2 billion to $9.5 billion. Cora Lewis is a business reporter for the Associated Press. Cora, let's get the basics. How do these things work?
So if you're a worker who has an unexpected expense or you're not sure you can make rent that month, you might see an ad for one of these apps on YouTube or Instagram. And all you have to do is download the app and link it to a bank account and agree to whatever the fees might be. And then on payday, the app will debit the amount you borrowed along with any fees or tips you've agreed to.
How are these different from payday loans?
So payday loans typically have very high interest rates, like these loans do themselves, but a payday loan might have a balloon payment down the line. They might sue or send a collector after an unpaid debt, which these apps don't do. So there are some key differences.
The advertising for this is that you're getting an early reach into your paycheck. Is that really what's going on?
The waters are a little muddied right now because some employers do offer earned wage access that's linked directly to your paycheck. So Walmart and Amazon both offer earned wage access without any fees to their employees, which is very different from the direct-to-consumer model. In the direct-to-consumer model, a worker can simply tell the app what their expected wages will be, and that's enough information for these short-term lenders to extend a couple $100s to whoever's using the app. And there's no credit check for these types of loans as well.
Who are the typical users of these apps?
A lot of gig workers and hourly workers in retail and food service use these apps, and a government study found that the average user makes less than $50,000 a year. So it's really people living paycheck to paycheck who are already having trouble meeting expenses who are turning to these apps.
What are some of the pitfalls?
So if you use them for one unexpected expense, if your car has a flat or you just need a couple $100s one time a month, it might be a really good and safe option. But what ends up happening often is an employee will use the app one pay period, and then their paycheck will be much smaller in the following week or 2 weeks. And so to plug that hole, they may turn back to the app again, which leads to a cycle of borrowing as much as once or twice a month, and those fees can really add up. It makes it increasingly difficult to budget, some researchers have found, where instead of having a reliable amount of money every 2 weeks, you have this much smaller paycheck on payday that you then have to compensate for, perhaps by taking out another short-term loan.
And you're talking about the fees and the cost of this. What are the fees?
So the companies will say the fees are comparable to ATM fees, so really just a couple of dollars per use case, and cheaper than overdraft fees, which can be $25 to $36, so maybe cheaper than overdrawing an account. Many apps do ask for monthly subscription fees or tips, which increase the costs, and when you look at them proportionally, the fees are really very high for such small dollar loans.
Is there any federal or state regulation of these, like payday loans are regulated?
So at the state level, Connecticut has passed a law making sure that these apps abide by the state's usury limits for interest, and as a result, at least one company stopped operating there. California is looking at similar laws to cap the fees, and at the federal level, there's an industry-backed bill that would allow them to continue operating as they are now.
Wasn't there a recent opinion from the Consumer Protection Finance Bureau that said these are not loans, and so they do not fall under federal regulation?
So that's part of what's contributing to the regulatory gray area right now, the question of whether these are loans or cash advances, and that will really determine how high the fees can be in the future. So there's a possibility that the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau will review that guidance and decide that these apps should be regulated the same way payday lenders are, which would have a considerable impact on the business as it stands right now.
Someone who's running low on cash before the next payday, they've got bills coming due, what should they consider? What should they think about before using these?
Before downloading any app, make sure you have a sense of what the cost of that loan will be. So that means look for monthly subscription fees, think carefully about linking your bank account, and then when you are asked for fees when it comes to an instant transfer, look for a 1 to 3 day transfer option, which is often cheaper or free. And then keep in mind that when these apps ask for tips, it may sound like they're going towards other vulnerable consumers and low-income people who need to make ends meet, but in fact, many of those tips simply support the company's operations themselves.
Cora Lewis of the Associated Press, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
The war in Ukraine has upended the lives of millions of people. It's also disrupted the lives of an untold number of animals, both pets and zoo animals. Some were left for days without food or water, traumatized by the sounds of war. Next Wednesday's episode of PBS's Nature is called Saving the Animals of Ukraine. It tells how war-torn Ukrainians are reclaiming a bit of their humanity by rescuing animals. Earlier, I spoke with the director, Anton Petushkin, about how the film came about.
It was February 2022, and it was just the beginning of the full-scale invasion from our side. And, there was a vast majority of photos and videos with people from Ukraine trying to save themselves and their animals. And we were so moved by this footage, because it was some kind of light of hope amidst these dark times. So we decided to just develop this topic and eventually, made this documentary.
You show us a lot of stories about many animals, some of them very tragic, some of them happier. One of the happier ones is about the Jack Russell Terrier named Patron. Started out as a pet for a young boy and now is actually serving his country in a way, been enlisted into the war effort. Tell us about Patron and what he's doing.
Basically, he is sniffing the bombs. And for me, the story is speak volumes, because Patron was just a regular dog, he just wants to play and just to walk. But because his father, dog parent, Michael, he's a colonel of engineer troops of Ukraine, he's looking for the mines. So that's why Patron started looking for the mines as well. Eventually, this dog became like a symbol of resilience of Ukraine, and he became, I believe, for the first time in history of UNICEF, he became like a goodwill ambassador dog.
You also show us animals who've been severely traumatized. I think of the lion named Bretzel. He lived through a Russian missile barrage in Kyiv. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, it turned out that animals, they almost share the same suffering as people. And the story of poor lion who was being kept in a cage in the Donetsk region, which is almost like a front line, and he was bombarded, this area was bombarded many times, and this poor lion, he had like severe symptoms of PTSD. He was trying to break away the cage, and he smashed his face against the cage. So eventually he was evacuated to Spain and to the place.
Very sorry for your loss, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
The American family has changed significantly since Mother's Day became a national holiday 110 years ago. Families are smaller. More people are choosing not to have children, and more are choosing to be single parents. Still others want to have children, but aren't able to. On this Mother's Day, we asked people around the country for their views on what motherhood means to them.
I did not set out to be a big family mom, although I would say I was open to it. And then one thing led to another, and we decided to engage in this adventure of having a big family.
Mother's Day is a very traditional holiday, and we have a very non-traditional family. I decided to have a child solo. I was getting old. And I realized that this thing inside me that wanted to...
And that it may not be the happiest day for everyone, but we all still deserve to be seen.
Finally tonight, for Mother's Day, an animated story from our partners at StoryCorps. Yomi Young was born with a rare genetic disorder that causes her bones to break under the slightest pressure. She and her mother, Sarah Churchill, talked about the day she was born.
Your skull was fractured, your arms, your ribs, your legs, and they said that you would probably die during the night. So the best thing would be to leave you at the hospital. But there was no way that I was going to leave you there. And they had a rocking chair, and I would sit there and hold you. And I remember our hearts touched each other. I used to always say, we have one heart, you and I.
So what was it like caring for me throughout the years?
Well, I remember giving you a bath, and you turned your arm, and I heard it.
The bone snap?
Yeah, and you were crying, I'm crying.
I used to keep track of my fractures, but then they just got out of control. They would fall, or I remember one time one of my sisters dropped an orange on me, and that broke something. I mean, you could look at me too hard and I would break. So I have my down periods, but I don't always have to articulate every single thing because you get it. You understand. You know, one of my regrets is that
losing my honor.
Now online, why undocumented immigrants worry that a new law in Oklahoma targeting illegal drugs will also target them. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. On Monday's NewsHour, Donald Trump.
On this Sunday night, smoke, fire, and fear. Let's go, 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 go! Raging wildfires force evacuation orders in Manitoba, Alberta, and BC. And the smoke smothering Western Canada. Major shakeup. The Russian president takes action after a missile strike on an apartment building on Russian soil. Israel in isolation, 7 months after the Hamas attack, fighting flares and the backlash grows. And a chance family reunion decades and worlds apart.
Martin, I think that I found my sister.
But that wouldn't be all. The coincidence that made it possible.
Global National with RNSO. Reporting tonight, Holly Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The erupting wildfire emergency is gripping Western Canada tonight. It's only early May and already wildfires are sparking and spreading.
Holy...
In Manitoba, a fire north of Flin Flon exploded in size overnight. Towering flames forced 700 people in the community of Cranberry Portage to flee Saturday night. The fire activity there is extreme, and strong winds mean it could spread quickly. It's one of a number of wildfires threatening communities across Manitoba, Alberta, and BC tonight, where residents are being ordered out or must be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. Following Canada's worst wildfire season in recorded history, there are fears this one will be just as devastating. Julia Foy has our top story.
Grandmother Rena Moore of Fort Nelson tries to calm her family after they pass a raging fire along the highway heading out of town.
My son and daughter-in-law, my mom and I, we went up to Hot Springs for the day. You don't have cell service.
Desperate to get back to their home, they saw a car coming towards them and stopped.
We flagged her down. I said, how was it? She said, it's scary, but I made it. I said, okay, let's go. And so my son drove, and we made it through in just over a minute.
It's pretty significant. You know, we've told people sort of this is their last warning to get out of town.
On Sunday, officials were pleading with all remaining residents of Fort Nelson and the Fort Nelson First Nation, a community of 3,500, to evacuate from the area.
It's starting to get worse. The fires, within 3 kilometers of the community to the west of us, and they're expecting westerly winds today.
Just over the border in Alberta, 160 fires are burning, the largest near Fort McMurray in Grand Prairie. Local residents are heading out to safety, many on an evacuation order.
Our number one priority is protecting Albertans and their communities, so we're doing everything we can on this one.
Come on, you guys. In Manitoba, 700 people were ordered to leave their homes Saturday night from the community of Cranberry Portage after a wildfire jumped Highway 10.
People are just trying to pack their stuff, loading up their boats, their quads, anything they could, campers.
It's okay, they're blocking it coming north.
As for Moore, with her family evacuated from Fort Nelson, this Mother's Day will be spent helping to feed and care for emergency workers and firefighters.
Everybody pulls together. It's an old-fashioned community up here. We're a family.
Julia Foy, Global News, Burnaby.
Choking smoke from those wildfires is blanketing communities across Western Canada today. Special air quality statements are in effect for large swaths of Alberta, as well as for communities in northern BC and on the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border. Smoke from that major wildfire near Fort Nelson, BC, blew into Calgary and Edmonton today. At times, the air quality index registered a moderate or high health risk. It was so smoky in Calgary this morning, kids' soccer games were canceled. The wildfires caused telecommunications outages, including to 911 services, but they're now mostly restored in the Yukon and northern BC. The wildfire west of Fort Nelson damaged fiber lines needed for the emergency hotline. Yukon's government says repairs are ongoing and that service may be intermittent over the next few days. Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed a major shakeup of his cabinet, replacing his defense minister Sergei Shoigu with former Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov. Shoigu has served in that role throughout Russia's war in Ukraine, and the announcement comes on the same day of a deadly explosion at an apartment block near the Ukrainian border. Russian media say at least 9 people have been killed after an intercepted Ukrainian missile hit the building in Belgorod. The Kremlin labeled the incident barbaric. It happened not far from where Russia claimed to have seized villages just inside Ukraine's border. The area is part of the Kharkiv region that Russia took control of at the start of its full-scale invasion in 2022. That's until Ukraine reclaimed the lost territory later that year. As Redmond Shannon reports, all of these events could mark important turning points in the war.
An entire section of an apartment block collapses following what appears to be an explosion at its base. But this is not Ukraine. This is the Russian city of Belgorod near the Ukrainian border. This area of Russia has seen an increasing number of attacks as the war has progressed, usually at military targets. The local governor says part of a missile from Ukraine killed and injured civilians. The Kremlin has called it a criminal use of weapons supplied by the West. Ukraine has not commented. Destruction too on the Ukrainian side of the border. That could mark a new phase of the war. Russian troops crossed into Ukraine's Kharkiv region on Friday, a new surprise offensive for land they captured and lost in 2022. Troops are evacuating thousands of people from border villages, which Ukraine says it is fighting to hold on to. This man says he was shot in the hand by a Russian soldier. The incursions are a half-hour drive from Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv.
It's scary. It's very scary for us.
Demining equipment maker Igor Yefimenko lives in Kharkiv and says it shouldn't be forgotten that Russia started the war.
After they came here in Kharkiv, we revenged them. And when I see that in Belgorod bombing, I think that should be.
Sunday's decision by Russian President Vladimir Putin to replace his defense minister comes after Sergei Shoigu spent 12 years in the job. Shoigu is being moved to a role as chair of Russia's Security Council. His replacement is former Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov, not a military man, but an economist, perhaps a sign of how important funding is to the future of this conflict. Colleen?
Thanks, Redmond. The widow of Alexei Navalny accepting this year's Dresden Peace Prize, awarded posthumously to the late Russian opposition leader. Yulia Navalnaya received a standing ovation and spoke out against Russia's war in Ukraine, saying, quote, Alexei spoke openly about the threat Putin poses to the world, and I will do so always as long as Putin is in power. The award is for people who have rendered outstanding services to peace and international understanding. In February, Navalny died unexpectedly at a remote Russian Arctic penal colony. To the crisis in Gaza, where there is growing anxiety over the Israeli military's expected assault on Rafah. More than 1 million Palestinian refugees face uncertainty in the area. Despite Israeli orders to evacuate, there's almost nowhere safe for them to go, while a dangerous shortage in humanitarian aid sets in. As Mackenzie Gray reports, Israel remains steadfast in its plan despite risking growing international alienation.
Months after the Israelis first took control of northern Gaza, fierce fighting has resumed, with both sides confirming extensive attacks, including a refugee camp just outside of Gaza City. An area the UN has warned before the fighting broke out could soon be experiencing a full-blown famine.
I'm deeply distressed by the fast deteriorating conditions in Gaza as Israeli forces intensify airstrikes on Jabalia and Beit Lahia in northern Gaza.
Concerns over famine tied to lack of goods getting into Gaza, the Israeli Defense Force is attempting to quell those concerns, releasing a video of a newly opened border crossing from Israel. But that need has increased since the Israelis have taken over the Rafah crossing, cutting off aid and seemingly preparing for a large-scale military invasion of the only area of Gaza they don't control. Warning, you're in a dangerous combat area. The IDF is about to operate with great force.
We've destroyed about 20 battalions of the Hamas's 24 terrorist battalions. We have another 4 to go there in Rafah. And that's why we want to go into Rafah.
An invasion Israel's most important ally is against.
We've said to Israel that we will not support an operation in Rafah, a major military operation, in the absence of a credible plan to protect civilians.
A stance supported by Canada and other Western countries, who've nearly all called for a ceasefire.
We want to stop the fighting, get the hostages out, and remove the Hamas threat.
While the politics plays out, people are on the run. 300,000 estimated to be pushed out of Rafah, many going to the beach, hoping to avoid further violence. When I came here, I found my tent worn out, this woman said. I stayed in it for 5 months in Rafah with other displaced people. Western countries aren't the only ones pushing back. Egypt is now threatening to rip up a 40-year peace treaty with Israel if Rafah is invaded, and they're also joining South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Colleen?
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Mackenzie, thank you. More than 10 days into a pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Toronto, there were more tense talks between student protesters and university officials. At a rally outside where the talks were being held, alumni stood in solidarity with protesters, threatening to tear up their degrees if the administration failed to listen to their demands, not unlike pro-Palestinian protests which have unfolded at several universities across North America over the last few weeks. In recent days, police aggressively dismantled encampments at the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta. But in Montreal today, another encampment was set up, this time at the University of Quebec. Global News has learned exclusive new details about the fourth suspect arrested yesterday in the murder of Hardeep Nijjar. According to a source familiar with the case, 22-year-old Amandeep Singh was allegedly one of two gunmen who shot Nijjar outside a Sikh temple last June. Like his three co-accused, Singh arrived in Canada on a temporary visa and is suspected of having links to India's violent Bishnoi crime group. Canada's national security agencies have been investigating an emerging trend in which foreign intelligence services are suspected of contracting out killings to crime groups. And you can read Stuart Bell's exclusive story at globalnews.ca. Coming up, armed forces failure, why a proposed class action settlement on racism in the military falls short for some. And on this Mother's Day, a family reunion that took 40 years and one simple gift to happen.
Goop Studio, Season 15.
A proposed settlement has been reached in a class action lawsuit against the Canadian Armed Forces. It's to help right the wrongs committed against members who say they've suffered racial discrimination in the military. But as Heidi Petracek reports, some say it misses the mark.
This is me sending off another response.
Former Canadian Forces member Wallace Fowler has been speaking out against racism in the military for more than 2 decades.
There's just been a lot of things that I've been fighting for with no justice.
He's one of the lead plaintiffs in a class action filed in 2016 against the federal government. The statement of claim describes how the lives of many have been devastated after it says the Canadian Forces has failed to protect racial minorities and Aboriginal peoples from racism within the ranks. Now, there's a proposed settlement on the table of $150 million. Fowler says it's not about the money. What he wants is the kind of change he's not convinced is happening.
They get caught, and what happens is there's settlements, and these guys still remain in position, right? That's the sad thing about it.
It just seemed that more and more people were accepting that type of behavior.
According to the lawsuit, plaintiff Jean-Pierre Robillard was called the N-word multiple times during his 17 years of service, including on deployment in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Despite that, he says he does respect the military as a whole, but individuals who committed acts of racism, he says, have never been properly held accountable.
Because on my end, it seems that the perpetrators are still in the services right now, misrepresenting Canada and their values.
This proposed settlement is all they have. It means the federal government doesn't admit liability. An approval hearing is scheduled for July.
The Minister of National Defense wouldn't comment on the proposed settlement because it hasn't been finalized. Canada's military has been working on anti-racism initiatives as it undergoes a major culture overhaul, which it has described as a top priority. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Just ahead, a quarter century later, Kosovo war refugees reunite and remember. It's been 25 years since a deadly war in Kosovo led to thousands of refugees temporarily resettling in Canada. Tensions between Kosovo's ethnic Albanian majority and Serbian authorities forced families to flee their homes and find safety abroad. Global's Vanessa Wright spoke with 2 refugees who reflect on that moment a quarter century ago when everything changed.
It was in front of our eyes. Before we even left, it was like we were right there. I looked behind me, just like right behind me, and my parents were like, "Don't look, don't look."
It's how Arta Reksapi remembers watching her home in Kosovo burn down at just 13 years old.
I remember saying to myself, one day I am going to tell the world my story.
Reksapi was just one of thousands to flee their homes in the spring of 1999. Their province, a former federal republic of Yugoslavia, was at the height of a brutal civil war between the Albanian majority and Serbian officials. The Canadian government airlifted an initial 5,000 refugees to shelter at military bases in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Ontario through Operation Parasol. It brought Reksapi, her parents, and 3 of her 5 siblings to Halifax, a place they would settle and call home.
Little did I know that Canadians would build us back up, piece by piece, and starting from our confidence into inspiring us to rewrite our stories.
An exhibit held in Halifax on Saturday acknowledged Kosovo refugees. It was Shakati Tahiri Suleimani's first time guest speaking at an event in Canada. She fled Kosovo in her 20s, settling in Alberta not only as a refugee, but she says as a survivor of sexual assault by Serbian forces.
I went back and it was really hard to think about it, but in the same time, I was really happy, and I am happy I'm here.
Both Reksapi and Suleimani say reflecting on the past, including the trauma, has sparked healing, but say ongoing tensions between the countries show a long road ahead.
Kosovo came very far in 25 years, but for us survivors, it's still stigma there.
Peaceful resolutions need to come, starting from acknowledging the past, acknowledging the war crimes and the atrocities that took place.
They hope Canada will be a part of sparking change, as they did 25 years ago. Vanessa Wright, Global News, Halifax.
Next, how an unexpected gift has reunited a family separated by 40 years and 3 different countries. It's Mother's Day, and as Canadians honor our moms today, one family is celebrating a reunion 4 decades in the making, one that spans 3 different countries. As Gloria Enriquez tells us, it all began with an unexpected gift.
Martin Moya gave his wife Diana Angarita a birthday gift that would unknowingly change their lives forever.
When something is for you, it's for you, you know? Because my husband wanted to give me that present.
Martin gave Diana a DNA test kit from a company called MyHeritage. Diana doesn't know her father. Her mom, Carmen, is an orphan. The present was meant to find more about her origins. When she got the test results in March,
my husband was beside me, and I told him, Martin, I think that I found my sister.
Diana grew up knowing her mom, Carmen, had given up her firstborn daughter for adoption. She had no means to care for the baby. I was so distraught when I left her, I was almost run over by a bus. I hadn't had food all day nor a place to live, she said. Since that day, Carmen simultaneously carried a heavy weight in her soul and the unwavering belief that a miracle would take place.
She always telling me, we are going to find Xiomara one day. But for me, it was like, yes, mommy, it's impossible. But yeah, she was right.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax. Take it.
Xiomara in the Netherlands had also taken the same DNA test with the same company, and she too wanted to reconnect.
I hope to see you very, very soon, together with my son.
The wish Carmen held for more than 4 decades is just one flight away from coming true. That she hugs me and I hug her, and we're happy together with my grandson, she said. The family is planning to meet in person this Christmas in Colombia, so Diana can show her sister her roots.
It would be like the perfect Christmas, you know, like this is the real gift.
Look at me. I am old, but I'm happy.
The gift of family. Gloria Enriquez, Global News, Montreal.
That is cool. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is Prescott Marina in Prescott, Ontario. Thanks for watching. Carolyn Jarvis will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.
Tonight, the star witness in the Donald Trump hush money trial set to take the stand tomorrow. What will Michael Cohen reveal? The former president's one-time ally turned adversary. Cohen expected to testify with his former boss just feet away. The whole case could hang on what he says. New reporting on how he's been preparing. A tornado tearing through western Pennsylvania. Look at that, ripping the steeple off this church with worshipers inside. We've got the new video as the twister hit and the lights went out. An all-out manhunt for whoever killed an officer. The suspect, broadcasting live on Instagram, now considered armed and dangerous. Police surrounding an apartment complex late today. Protests erupting just as Jerry Seinfeld started giving the commencement address at Duke. Some students walking out. We'll explain. One-on-one with the commissioner of the WNBA, what people said to her before women's basketball took off. Was that offensive to you? Well, it was not shocking to me. And the Beatlemania mystery 60 years in the making. Paul McCartney and the search for Adrian from Brooklyn.
Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrian from Brooklyn loves you.
This is NBC Nightly News with Hallie Jackson.
We're coming on the air tonight ahead of what may be the biggest moment in one of the biggest trials in American history. The former president's former fixer set to take the stand to testify against Donald Trump. To the prosecution, Michael Cohen's a linchpin, the star witness, the one who can connect the dots back to Mr. Trump himself. To the defense, Cohen's an unreliable narrator with no credibility, motivated by revenge, once described as a rat by his former boss. The reality, Cohen was one of Mr. Trump's closest confidants, an advisor, now turned antagonist. And tomorrow, under oath, Cohen will share what he knows about the cover-up scheme Mr. Trump's accused of in the unprecedented case against a former and potentially future president. Dasha Burns starts us off.
Just hours from now, former President Trump set to face off in the courtroom with his fixer-turned-foe, Michael Cohen. Cohen paid adult film actress Stormy Daniels $130,000 as part of an alleged catch-and-kill plot to prevent her story of sex with Mr. Trump from getting out before the 2016 election. And he's the key witness who could potentially tie the alleged scheme to the former president and link him to the crime of falsifying business records when he repaid Cohen that money. Mr. Trump denies the relationship and pled not guilty. His team now looking to undermine Cohen's credibility using his own criminal past and history of lying under oath. NBC News has learned that prosecutors have been working with Cohen and preparing for his testimony for an entire year, and his time on the stand is expected to last several days. Cohen unleashing on his old boss in his book and on social media, spotted online this week wearing a t-shirt depicting Mr. Trump behind bars.
This case is a sham.
The former president railed against the trial at a Jersey Shore rally last night.
Al Capone was so mean that if you went to dinner with him and he didn't like you, you'd be dead the next morning. And I got indicted more than him on both.
His attacks getting personal.
The gloves are off.
Mocking the weight of the district attorney who brought the case and escalating his attacks on President Biden.
He's a moron. I would have never talked with that kind of disrespect for president.
This weekend, Biden and Trump both on the trail, with President Biden slamming Mr. Trump in a closed-door fundraiser, saying he's obsessed with losing in 2020 and calling him clearly unhinged.
Dasha's at the courthouse where it'll all go down tomorrow. And Dasha, we may be getting close to the defense making its argument. Yeah, Hallie, the prosecution says they could rest their case as soon as the end of this week. Then the big question is, will the defense call former President Trump himself to the stand? Hallie? We'll see. Dasha Burns, thank you very much. It's a stunning new video tonight of a tornado ripping through western Pennsylvania and the terrifying moment it slammed into a church with worshipers inside. George Solis has the latest.
Watch as this tornado rips through western Pennsylvania, shredding rooftops. The National Weather Service preliminarily says the twister was an EF2, with wind speeds of up to 118 miles per hour, leaving some residents forced to seek shelter, including about 100 members of this local church, some infants.
I go out and I see debris flying all over the auditorium, so I immediately thought I'd be down in the basement.
The tornado striking in the middle of church services. Watch as the lights go out as the pastor's wife was in the midst of a song.
I thought I heard the windows start to shatter, and then the sound was like a train coming through.
That's the church steeple that flew off the building and damaged several cars. The pastor says, amazingly, no one was seriously hurt. The severe weather continuing the trend of tornadoes over the weekend, with 4 preliminary ones reported yesterday across the Ohio Valley and 3 potential ones in southwest PA. The National Weather Service reports there have been a staggering 746 preliminary tornadoes year to date, some that have recently decimated through the heartland. But back in Pennsylvania, cleanup is still underway tonight.
I heard the winds, like real strong winds at my house a half a mile away.
Many also thankful they survived.
There's no way we should be here. I'm telling you, God was with us.
George Solis, NBC News.
To breaking news in Ohio and the urgent manhunt for an armed and dangerous suspect after a police officer was shot and killed near Cleveland last night. Jesse Kirsch is there.
Tonight, shots ringing out in the Cleveland suburbs. Heavily armed law enforcement teams swarming the Shaker Heights, Ohio neighborhood. A truck marked explosives. An emergency phone alert warning people to shelter in place. So far, authorities have not publicly shared why they converged on this area. But the scene comes as police urgently search for this man, considered armed and extremely dangerous after allegedly shooting and killing a police officer last night.
One officer down, 2 gunshot wounds. We have the front secured.
Authorities say late Saturday, police were investigating a disturbance in Euclid, Ohio, when an officer was, quote, ambushed, shot, and taken to the hospital. Ohio's Attorney General says Euclid police officer Jacob Durbin, on the job less than a year, did not survive.
Apparently, CPD is receiving info that this male on Instagram live saying he's going to kill himself.
After the shooting, this video shared on an Instagram account belonging to the suspect, 24-year-old Deshaun Anthony Vaughn. In it, he says that he could not go back to jail. Posts made repeatedly. One sharing the police alert about Vaughn with laughing emojis. Another post promising he'd be okay. Meanwhile, Vaughn had sparked an overnight, hours-long manhunt.
Jesse's joining us now from near that standoff with police. And Jesse, it's still happening now?
Yeah, it appears so, Hallie. We're trying to get some latest information from authorities. You can see that this area is still blocked off by police, but it appears that some traffic is resuming in this neighborhood. We're about 15 miles from where authorities say that deadly shooting occurred last night, but at this point, authorities have not made clear if that scene and this one are at all connected. Hallie.
Jesse Kirsch live for us there in Ohio. Thank you. A sharp message to Israel tonight from the Secretary of State, concerned the Israelis have no credible plan to keep civilians in Gaza safe ahead of a possible invasion of Rafah, an invasion the U.S. has warned against. But now, new signs it may be imminent. Hala Garani has the latest from Cairo. Hala?
Hallie, renewed Israeli strikes in Gaza are causing alarm among the hundreds of thousands of civilians fleeing Rafah, many saying there is nowhere left for them to go. On Meet the Press this morning, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the Israeli military had not provided, quote, credible assurances on civilian protection ahead of that planned assault on Rafah. And meanwhile, the Israeli military is operating on multiple fronts inside of Gaza, including in the north and Khan Yunis. The IDF had withdrawn from some of those areas, but is now having to confront regrouped Hamas fighters in various parts of the besieged enclave. Hallie?
Hala Garani, thank you. Another anti-war protest at a college graduation today, but this one directed at a billionaire Jewish celebrity. Jerry Seinfeld was just about to give his commencement address at Duke when it happened. Elwin Lopez explains.
Comedian Jerry Seinfeld today taking the stage at Duke University, where he was scheduled to deliver the commencement address and receive an honorary degree. Soon after he was introduced, students walked out, some waving Palestinian flags. Booze and chants erupted. It comes after weeks of protests at colleges nationwide against the Israel-Hamas war. Seinfeld later delivering his speech.
Again, a lot of you are thinking, I can't believe they invited this guy. Too late. I say, use your privilege. I grew up a Jewish boy from New York. That is a privilege if you want to be a comedian.
The sitcom creator taking to Instagram after the Hamas attack on Israel October 7th, stating in part, I will always stand with Israel and the Jewish people, later visiting Tel Aviv. The university saying in part, we respect the right of everyone at Duke to express their views peacefully. It's the latest in a series of weekend interruptions at graduations across the country. At UC Berkeley, the student body president's speech was interrupted by chants.
This wouldn't be Berkeley without a protest, so I get it.
In Wisconsin, a handful of students turned their backs on the chancellor, some wearing graduation caps with messages like Free Palestine. And at the University of Texas, dozens protested on campus after the ceremony concluded. The tension on campus is nationwide, coming to a boiling point, just as universities and colleges break for the summer. Elwin Lopez, NBC News.
A major development in that deadly Baltimore bridge disaster, with part of the bridge set to be blown up tomorrow. Remember, that bridge collapsed back in March after a cargo ship slammed into it, killing 6 men, blocking the port, and trapping the ship underneath. Take a look at this animation. It shows how officials will try to use explosives to destroy key sections of the wreckage. You see it there. The goal? To get the port back open and to get the ship safely back to shore. Still ahead tonight, a new front in the fast food wars. How McDonald's is trying to win customers back by giving their budgets a break. And we'll go one-on-one with the WNBA commissioner as the league's most anticipated season ever begins. So, can it live up to the hype? All eyes on the WNBA. Caitlin Clark set to shake up the game, and the league's commissioner sharing more about what's really behind that pay gap between the men and the women. If you haven't been able to see those amazing northern lights that everybody's been talking about, the show's not over yet. Look at this. This weekend solar storm has created some of the most spectacular aurora borealis of our time across America, even down south. And tonight for millions, an encore. Take a look. If you live above that green line right there, you have the best chance to see the northern lights, although cloud cover could make it a little trickier in some parts of the Midwest. Good luck. To women's basketball now definitely having a moment. And while a lot of folks may be hoping superstar Caitlin Clark can take the WNBA to the next level, it's not all on her. We sat down with the league's commissioner, who's been planning for this moment for years, hoping for just this kind of momentum. And she says this season, which tips off this week, is just the beginning. Caitlin Clark's historic college run, the most watched women's college hoops game ever, a record number of WNBA draft viewers. For women's basketball, did you ever think that this sport would be where it is today? Never. A winning streak the WNBA commissioner's committed to keeping alive. So much of this needs to be about momentum.
Yeah, the momentum around followership, around these generational players coming into our league. So it is taking that momentum, capitalizing on marketing around it.
This year, a far cry from when Kathy Engelbert took over in 2019.
There's no doubt when I came into the league, a lot of people did view it. Someone asked me whether we were a charity, and I said, like a 501c3.
Is that offensive to you?
No, well, it was not shocking to me.
No one thinks the W is a charity now. Their commissioner likes to say, in sports, you need big games, big names, and big rivalries. And this season, they'll have Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who battled in the college playoffs, set to face off again now as professionals.
I'm a big studier of history, and I look back to the Bird Magic moment in the NBA in 1979, and it really put the NBA on the map.
Another NBA comparison, one Engelbert argues is unfair, the salaries. Like when last month, a firestorm erupted over Clark, the top draft pick, only making $76,000 a year in base pay, not counting what's likely to be millions more in endorsement deals. The minimum pay for any NBA player, $1 million.
You've called that a false narrative. What? I appreciate the conversation around it, but as I joined the league when we weren't even in our 25th season, and the men's leagues in their 75th and 105th and 110th season, I know for any startup business, any business in its infancy, maybe now we're an adolescent or a teenager, you need to build a revenue model that funds all the things like higher pay, better travel. And that's what I was hired to come in and do. We're growing the league so that in our next media rights negotiation, all of our corporate partners stepping up and paying us more.
Her pitch to partners now backed up with record ticket sales, and with more revenue, she hopes, more investment in salaries and in travel, with teams this year flying on charter jets instead of mostly commercial planes like they used to. And the league set to get even bigger. Engelbert's hoping to expand from 12 teams to 16 in the next 4 years. At this scrimmage between the Washington Mystics and Minnesota Lynx, players are feeling the energy.
I think the moment that we're having with this league right now is special. I think it's about time. It's nice for women in sports, but let's get the ball rolling.
I'm happy that they're a little late to the party, but I'm really happy that everybody's coming along and enjoying the ride. These days, it's all about the long game.
This is a decades-long process that you see. Well, and I definitely think we have this moment, this momentum to turn it into setting this league up for decades.
When we come back, a mystery finally solved after more than half a century. How one family's Mother's Day feels a little brighter because Paul McCartney just couldn't let it be.
And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrian from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart.
There's good news tonight on this Mother's Day about a long-lost film clip and how Paul McCartney helped one family reconnect with memories of their mom, who could never hide her love away. The Beatles touching down in New York City 60 years ago as the most popular band on the planet. A dream come true for one teenage fan, skipping school to send this message to her Fab Four fave.
And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrian from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart. Even when I'm 105-year-old grandmother, I love him.
A film clip long forgotten, long before there was such a thing as a viral video. But then, a couple weeks ago, this happened.
Hey, Adrian, it's Paul. Listen, I saw your video. I'm in Brooklyn now. I'm in New York. I finally got here. We've got an exhibition, photo exhibition. Come along and see it.
Paul McCartney giving that Adrian a social media shout-out, inviting her to his new Beatlemania exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. But who was Adrian from Brooklyn? Turns out, her family saw that Paul shout-out.
Hey, Sir Paul, I hear you're looking for my mother.
Adrian from Brooklyn was Adrian D'Onofrio, and while she passed away in 1992, this new chapter in her Beatles fandom is a special new memory for her 4 kids.
I'm gonna be emotional. The favorite thing about my mom was that she was my friend. She was the best mother. When we saw Paul McCartney call out, "Hey, Adrian from Brooklyn," we were like, okay, this is a sign from my mom. That's how she played her music.
A mom described by her daughters, Nicole and Ursula, as larger than life.
What do you guys think of these hairstyles?
Now, on Mother's Day, the family thrilled to share her story with the world.
She'd be jumping up and down. She'd be like, "Oh my God, it's me, Adrian!"
She always had music in the background, especially the Beatles, dancing around the house. She was fun. She was caring. She was amazing as a mom.
And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrian from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart.
Millions have now seen it, bringing back joyful memories of the mom who opened her heart and home to everyone, and where music always took center stage.
All you need is love, and you'll get through everything.
Yeah.
All you need is love.
Yeah, that's the way she was.
With so much love to moms out there tonight, I'm Hallie Jackson. For all of us at NBC, we'll see you right back here next week.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
But we're going to move on to this next part here, which is kind of in Donald's death. At a mass rally of an estimated 100,000 people, Trump hinted at one candidate who could become his VP on the short list. Here's Fox News correspondent Madeline Rivera.
Former President Trump is bullish about his prospects in New Jersey, even though it's not considered a battleground state. His team is pointing to the crowd of people who gathered in Wildwood Saturday as a sign of his momentum in the Garden State. Wildwood's proximity to Philadelphia, only about 90 minutes away, also allowed the campaign to reach voters in what is considered a key swing state, Pennsylvania. North Dakota Governor and former GOP presidential candidate Doug Burgum spoke before Trump took the stage, raising speculation that he could be on Trump's VP shortlist.
Doug Burgum and Catherine, who's been, it's just an incredible couple. And you won't find anybody better than this gentleman in terms of his knowledge of, he made his money in technology, but he probably knows more about energy than anybody I know. So get ready for something, okay? Just get ready. But Doug Burgum has been incredible, and the country's lucky to have him.
It's unclear what Trump is alluding to when he told the crowd to get ready. A campaign spokesperson telling Fox and Friends this when it comes to the former president's pick for our running mate.
The Republican National Convention is coming up soon, right? In a couple of months in July. I think President Trump has said that he will make his decision later this summer. And in true President Trump fashion, he will go directly to the American people to do that. Governor Burgum was with us last night. He introduced the president, who's been a fantastic governor for his state. There's a lot of great options on the table. What I will say is that any one of them will be much better than Kamala Harris. That is for sure.
Trump claims Nikki Haley isn't among those options, though. The former president dismissed the chances of a Trump-Haley ticket on Truth Social over the weekend. Joey.
Thank you. Conch, you were there last night. Burgum came, spoke, I think, for about 15 minutes. Was he received like a vice presidential candidate?
Absolutely, because he's seen as a successful businessman just like Donald Trump, and there's no baggage there, and he has a great approval rating in North Dakota. Overall, it was amazing to see
100,000 people, according to the city of Wildwood, at this rally, and all of them congregated, and no one rioted, and no one looted, and there wasn't any anti-Semitism in the air. It was a happy environment, whether we're talking about the crowd, whether we're talking about Donald Trump, who relished the moment. That's certainly for sure. Lisa, when you look at Doug Burgum, I was really impressed with him in the debates. I don't know that he won the debates, but he probably won the most ground in the debates, maybe because most of us didn't know who he was. But Trump talked about how he's an energy guy. Do you think this is a VP thing, or maybe just an energy, just kind of piggybacking on Biden's weaknesses?
Look, Trump's going to pick who Trump wants to pick, right? But look, Trump is such a force of nature on his own. I don't think he needs a vice president who's getting headlines and who's drawing attention. That way, I think that having someone who's just steady, steady the core, someone that can win over maybe more moderate voters. So I think that in that instance, Doug Burgum could be a good pick because he is just steady. He's not inflammatory. He doesn't really garner a lot of headlines. And I don't really think Trump needs someone who does.
Doctor, real quick, when you look at those that were on that debate stage, Nikki Haley lasted the longest. It got pretty nasty there at the end. And then we hear this week, maybe she's going to go on the list. Madeline right there said not on the list. Does Trump need Nikki Haley on his team to win?
Does he need Nikki Haley on his team to win? No, but right now there is a battleground for Nikki Haley supporters. I mean, I think it was just in Indiana. She did get 22% of the votes, even though she's already dropped out of the race. So there is a large amount of votes up for grab right now. We see President Biden trying really hard to get them. I think he put out an ad that specifically said, Donald Trump doesn't want your vote if you voted for Nikki Haley or if you support Nikki Haley. So, I don't like that, but I do think Burgum would be a very good option for people who could potentially get some of Nikki Haley supporters because, as Lisa pointed out and you pointed out, he has a lot of innovative ideas, especially when it comes to energy, especially in his business mindset. And he's setting himself up for a place in the administration. He's not going to run for a third term, and I think he'd be a good.
Well, just real quick. A lot of the hay is being made about Nikki Haley. But when you look at Indiana, you look at New Hampshire, you look at South Carolina, we're talking about open primary or semi-primary states. So would those voters even vote for Nikki Haley if she was on the ticket in 2024?
We'll continue this discussion for weeks to come until we get a VP.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube. Tonight, thousands of Canadians forced out of their homes. The wildfire season hits Western Canada, British Columbia, and Alberta, tracking dozens of fires.
May is typically our busiest month for wildfire activities.
Fort Nelson, BC evacuated. In Alberta, Fort McMurray on high alert. Plus, Israel defiant, stepping up its military campaign in Gaza despite a growing rift with its allies.
There's nothing anywhere that is safe in Gaza right now.
The deeper push into Rafah, the humanitarian crisis, and the struggle to find a ceasefire. And 50 years of wishing and hoping to find love.
Hold on to hope, because when it's right, it's right.
How one woman's birthday dream finally came true just as she had almost given up.
CTV National News with Heather Butts. Reporting tonight, Todd Vanderhayden.
Good evening. Thousands of people in northern British Columbia have been forced out of their homes because of a wildfire that's now out of control. An evacuation order in place for Fort Nelson, and in Alberta, Fort McMurray and other communities on alert for possible evacuations to come, with people in parts of Grand Prairie under orders to leave. And the Northwest Territories and Yukon seeing 911 services knocked out because of fires. Now both provinces and territories rushing to avoid a repeat of what happened last year when Western Canada faced its worst ever wildfire season. CTV's Colton Prale has more.
Emergency evacuation. Everyone has to leave Fort Nelson.
For the first time in most of their lives, the over 3,000 people in Fort Nelson, British Columbia, and the surrounding region are under a full evacuation order. A fast-growing wildfire has more than doubled in size since Friday and is quickly bearing down the town, now less than 8 kilometers away.
A tree falling down on a power line caused a fire, and when our fire crews got there, it was just a few acres, and within a couple hours, it was well over 30 hectares and moving.
This weekend, wildfires have knocked out internet and phone lines across much of the Yukon. In Alberta, an evacuation alert was issued for Fort McMurray, and further south, some residents in TP Creek near Grand Prairie have been told to leave. Experts blame drought conditions and high winds.
We've seen that increased fire danger all winter long. We've had wildfires burning since January. We still have 23 carryover wildfires from last.
Up with the latest news in World Roundup with Mark Owen. Get all the facts and insights on recent world events.
That's World Roundup with me, Mark Owen, on France 24.
Hello and welcome back to World Roundup here on France 24 with me, Jean-Emile Jamin. These are your latest headlines making news. Vladimir Putin has moved to replace Sergei Shoigu as Russia's defense minister, with a civilian taking his place. At the same time, Russia's latest invading offensive has gained ground in Ukraine, as thousands are forced to evacuate in the northeastern region of Kharkiv. Then Israel's impending Rafah offensive has drawn further condemnation, this time from Washington itself, with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken warning the current strategy lacks a credible plan to safeguard Palestinian civilians. And Spain's Socialist Party nears victory in the regional Catalan elections, a result which would see the end of a decade of rule by the separatists under Carles Puigdemont. Welcome back to World Roundup on France 24. Vladimir Putin has replaced Sergei Shoigu as Russia's defense minister and appointed him as secretary of Russia's National Security Council. It comes after Putin had earlier proposed Andrei Belousov, an economist, recent deputy prime minister and civilian, as the country's new defense minister. Earlier I spoke to former Moscow correspondent Nick Holdsworth, asking him if this was a rebuke of Shoigu.
It's hard to say at this stage whether it's a rebuke. All we have to go on really are the comments that the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov made earlier, saying that the defence ministry must absolutely be open to innovation, to the introduction of all advanced ideas, to the creation of conditions for economic competitiveness. Now, that seems to suggest that they brought in the civilian economist, Andrei Belousov, to get in charge of the nitty-gritty of the cost of keeping this war in Ukraine running. That probably was never going to be Sergei Shoigu. Now, Shoigu is an extreme survivor. He's been around in government in Russia longer than Putin has, and has survived a lot of criticism over the years. There's been an awful lot of criticism in the last couple of years from a lot of the pro-war military bloggers in Russia, criticising Shoigu and his chief of staff Gerasimov for the conduct of the operation in Ukraine. Now, it's interesting that Gerasimov, the chief of staff, has been left in place, and that, again, Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, saying earlier that we're not interfering in military matters, this is really to do with efficiency matters. Now, it's interesting that Shoigu is replacing Nikolai Petrushov, who's a well-known hawk who's been the head of the Security Council till now, and is known to be a very influential figure. So it's quite possible that Petrushov has agreed to these changes in return for some other post or for other things that may be of use to them. There's been tension between Petrushov, who represents the old KGB, the security services, and Shoigu, representing the military. There has been tension in recent years between those two groups. So it's interesting that we're seeing kind of a swapping of the guard here, with Shoigu coming in as the Secretary of the Defence, the Security Council. Petrushov, we don't know yet where he's been reshuffled to.
We'll see if Belousov's campaign as defense minister can change anything with regards to Ukraine. Well, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says intense battles are raging across parts of the border in the Kharkiv region. Moscow's forces have smashed through the front line on Friday, threatening to open a new front in the war. Ukraine's chief commander is told of difficulties in holding the line, with US weapons deliveries taking time to arrive. 4,000 people have now been forced to flee Greater Kharkiv, with the Russian invasion now focusing on the town of Vovchansk. Now, correspondent in Ukraine, Emmanuel Shaz, earlier brought us the latest on those evacuations.
4,000 people fled and were evacuated from the settlements that are under heavy fighting and also heavy shelling at the border between Russia and Ukraine. This new ground offensive, this attempt at a ground offensive by Russia, is causing those thousands of citizens to leave those settlements. Those are settlements that were already occupied by Russia back in 2022. So the people evacuating are trying to avoid to be under occupation once again. Some can flee by themselves, but most do have to be evacuated by the authorities, by NGOs, simply because we are talking about mostly people who can't leave, who are disabled, who are also often elderly people, or simply farmers who are there who don't want to leave their animals, and they are doing those evacuations under heavy shelling. A colleague of mine, Francis Farrell from the Kyiv Independent, was in Vovchansk yesterday. He was saying that dozens of gliding bombs were thrown on the village and were falling on civilian houses, residential areas, killing people and animals. So the situation is very, very tense, very dire for those thousands of people who are stuck there between the two armies.
Israeli forces have pushed deeper into Rafah this Sunday as battles have raged with Hamas militants. Prior to the latest offensive, about 1.3 million civilians had arrived to shelter in the southern Gaza city. Some 300,000 have since fled following evacuation orders from the IDF. Israeli forces have pushed deeper, and that's all follows statements by the United States, UN, and Egypt condemning the move by Israel to go into Rafah. Antonia Kerrigan reports.
Many thousands more Gazans fled the ruins of Rafah on Sunday after fresh Israeli evacuation orders the day before.
I wasn't planning to leave, but I'm leaving now because there's no one left in the camp. We're tired and lost. We don't know where to go.
Israeli flyers point them towards the so-called humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi on the coastline of northwestern Rafah, even though aid organizations say this area is not ready to receive an influx of displaced people. The first Israeli tanks rolled into Rafah last Tuesday, the first step in a major ground operation they say is indispensable for defeating Hamas and freeing the Israeli hostages taken on the 7th of October. But amid international outcry at what the UN says would be an epic humanitarian disaster, their number one ally is turning up the heat.
And we said to Israel that we will not support an operation in Rafah, a major military operation, in the absence of a credible plan to protect civilians.
And they still haven't delivered it. So, adding that such an offensive would not be effective in eliminating Hamas. This after President Biden decided to suspend a shipment of 3,500 US bombs to Israel last week, and neighbouring Egypt has sent its strongest message yet, announcing it will formally support South Africa's genocide case against Israel before the International Court of Justice, also calling on the UN Security Council to take immediate action to bring about a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and an end to military operations in Rafah. For some months now, hopes of a ceasefire agreement have been fleeting. US President Biden told an audience on Friday that there would be a ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas released the hostages, while Turkish President Erdogan condemned the US and European states' failure to pressure Israel into a ceasefire deal.
The separatist party that has governed Catalonia for a decade under Carles Puigdemont has lost their majority in Sunday's regional vote, with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's socialists taking an unassailable lead. France 24 Sarah Morris sent us this explainer from Spain, expanding on the latest results.
The Catalan socialist leader Salvador Illa may have the best chance to form a government in Catalonia. He may turn to the left-wing parties and to even the Catalan separatist left to form a government, but it looks as if the numbers give him the best chance to form a government, and that could oust a separatist presidency for the first time in over a decade. But the formation, if that is possible, of a non-separatist presidency, that may mean that Pedro Sanchez, the socialist prime minister, has trouble keeping his government afloat in the central government in Madrid. He is at the moment reliant on the votes of separatists, particularly the votes of Carles Puigdemont Puigdemont, their leader of junts, the moral leader at least, and Carlos Puigdemont has made it very clear that if Salvador Illa ends up in the presidency in Barcelona, that Pedro Sanchez could go from Madrid, as he puts it.
That's it for this edition of World Roundup. There's more news coming up on France 24. We'll see you soon.
I'm going to Great Britain.
Look after him, or I'll chop your nuts off. You're in Great Britain now.
God save the king. Dads can be different. I'm still in the chorus.
Austin starts Sunday, June 9 on ABC and ABC iView. Today, a light plane prepares to make an emergency landing at Newcastle Airport after its landing gear fails. A former Chinese spy details the inner workings of the country's notorious secret police, including a covert operation on Australian soil. Tomorrow's federal budget is set to confirm soft economic growth, but inflation could be easing. And we get some practical advice for parents on social media use as South Australia considers a complete ban for children under 14. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ross Childs. A light plane is circling above Newcastle Airport at Williamtown ahead of what will be an emergency landing after its landing gear failed. The private plane is believed to have 3 people on board and has been circling above the airport for hours, burning off fuel. Our reporter Giselle Wakatana is there and she joins us now. Hi Giselle. So what more do we know at this stage?
Well, Roz, certainly it's all happening here. Preparations for this emergency landing. It's all systems go. Just before 10, a fleet of a dozen or more fire trucks arrived at the airport and headed to the tarmac. Of course, police here in force as well, the State Emergency Service and rescue helicopters and other people are here, paramedics, waiting for this plane. What we do know is, Roz, that within about 10 minutes of this plane, it's a private plane. It was headed for Port Macquarie. We know that within about 10 minutes in flight that there was a problem and that the landing gear had failed, and therefore that prompted a return and circling above the Newcastle Airport, which also doubles as the Williamtown RAAF base. So hence we've got an emergency response centre set up within the RAF base to deal with this. What we do know is that the plane has been circling, as we say, for more than 2 hours above, trying to burn off that fuel to try and make it easier for what they call a belly landing. But I guess they're trying to have contingencies in place for whatever scenarios will unfold. And we do know that there was a scheduled attempt around 11 a.m. That didn't happen. Since then, we've got a new schedule that should be around 12:30. But the weather here, Roz, it's very cloudy. It's you can probably see behind me, it's raining. And I'm no expert, but I don't know. We know that any attempt will be based on the conditions at the time.
Emergency services are at the scene. Giselle, just take us through what happens once the plane does touch down.
Well, I'm assuming, again, we're not privy to any of their, training drills or things like that, but clearly they've had preparations and training for these emergency responses. So we know they're here lining the tarmac, ready to act in terms of whatever plays out. This plane is going to be a precarious situation trying to guide that along the tarmac, along the runway. We've seen a couple of events just while I've been here for about an hour and a half or so where it's sort of had some run-throughs where it's become parallel to the runway, doing those final run-throughs in preparation. Things have been held up somewhat because there have been some other passenger jets that were here awaiting takeoff, but I guess the crews will react as to whatever happens. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. There's a massive crowd here, but once word had filtered out that this was going to happen, so it's wait and see. We're all nervously waiting here.
Fingers crossed. All goes well. Giselle, thank you. And we'll, of course, return to the story once the plane makes that emergency belly landing. China has long been accused of operating clandestine intelligence networks around the world to hunt enemies of the state. Well, now for the first time, an agent of the Chinese secret police is speaking out.
This
is the voice of a Chinese spy handler messaging his secret agent. In an exclusive interview, the former agent has told Four Corners about the inner workings of one of China's most notorious intelligence units.
I worked for the Chinese Political Security Department for 15 years. Today, it's still the darkest department of Chinese government.
2 decades ago, when the secret police discovered Eric was a member of a pro-democracy group, they ordered him to spy on his colleagues.
I had to work for the secret police. I was forced to work for them.
For the next 15 years, Eric tracked down Chinese dissidents around the world, including Evan in Australia.
I don't dare to stay in one place. I drive and stop in towns within an hour and a half of Melbourne.
Evan has ridiculed Chinese President Xi Jinping and his daughter on YouTube.
You can humiliate the Chinese Communist Party, but you can't humiliate Xi Jinping.
Fleeing China, Evan arrived in Australia in 2018. Soon after, Eric was tasked with luring Evan to Southeast Asia, where he could be kidnapped by the secret police. In 2021, Edwin was attacked by men he believes were agents of the Chinese state.
The Victorian police didn't say much to me afterwards. They only said they would check the surveillance camera, and then nothing happened until the AFP contacted me.
Then last year, the Australian Federal Police confirmed Evan's fears.
They told me they disrupted an intelligence agency in Australia. They had acquired some information that indicated the CCP was looking for me in Australia.
That espionage investigation is ongoing. The AFP declined to comment about Evan In's case. Now the former spy has his own fears about repercussions from China.
It's possible that some agents on the ground may kidnap me.
The former hunter has become the hunted. Echo Hoi, ABC News.
And investigative journalist Echo Hoy is with me in the studio. Hi, Echo. So what is China's secret police then, and what sort of operations do they undertake?
So the secret police are one of China's most powerful and notorious intelligence unit. They sit within the Ministry of Public Security, which is China's policing agent. And because of that, they have the power not only to just spy on the targets, on the threats, they can also prosecute them. And their operation they have been undergoing on a global scale is really they send their secret agent all around the world to track down and hunt down high-profile target and try to repatriate them back to China.
And what did we learn from this former spy about secret police operations here in Australia?
Yes, so he was asked to track down the target in 2018, and he's a dissident living in Australia at the time, and he had just recently fled China at that period of time. And we have know that at the time the former spy is told to lure him to Southeast Asia, from where he could be taken back to China. And Edwin Yin, which is the target, he's now still living in Australia, but he's constantly in hiding, constantly worrying people will be trying to harass him and trying to take him back to China, even while he's living in Australia.
By speaking to you, though, he's putting himself in huge danger, isn't he? Why did he decide to come out?
So I think he explained that pretty well in the program. But to begin with, he was forced into working for the Chinese secret police while he was a dissident himself 15 years ago. But more importantly, he said he still believes in some value, which is freedom and justice, and that gives him courage to do something different and make some different choices.
And does his testimony then raise concerns about Australia's national security?
Absolutely. And we have learned as well through our investigation that Australian Federal Police has recently conducted a secret raid in Sydney just last year, and it was in relation to a Chinese spying network, which showed they're pretty much still active in Australia.
Echo Hoy, thank you.
Thank you.
And you can watch Four Corners tonight at 8:30 on ABC TV, and any time after that on ABC iView. New figures on the eve of the federal budget show inflation is forecast to be slightly better than was expected 6 months ago. Political reporter Evelyn Manfield joins us now to talk through the numbers. Hi there, Evelyn. So what are Treasury expectations on inflation in the months ahead?
Well, when Treasurer Jim Chalmers hands down his budget here in Canberra tomorrow night, it's expected to show that inflation is moderating faster than Treasury was expecting. So 6 months ago, the inflation forecast for mid-year this year was at 3.75%. It's now looking like it'll be at 3.5% according to these forecasts from Treasury. Now, worth pointing out, it's not as good as Treasury was forecasting 12 months ago in last year's budget, but is an improvement on that forecast from 6 months ago. Now, the big question is when will inflation get to within that target range of between 2 and 3%? The government says that could be reached by the end of this year, and it's quite different to what the Reserve Bank was forecasting just last week. They were expecting that by the end of this year, inflation would be at 3.8% and wouldn't get to below 3% until the end of 2025. Now, the government says the reason for the difference in forecast is because Treasury was privy to details within tomorrow night's budget that the Reserve Bank wasn't. But nonetheless, the opposition is questioning the difference. Take a listen to Finance Minister Katie Gallagher and Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume.
It really is that Treasury have been able to incorporate some of the decisions that we've taken in the budget into their forecasts. Obviously, that's not available to the RBA ahead of the budget. They're both made independently. So those forecasts from Treasury are the ones that will be published in the budget, and they take into consideration all of the set of decisions that we've taken.
Well, it's certainly very different from the RBA's forecast that was made only 6 days ago. And I suppose it's really up to the Treasurer now to tell us exactly how the government is going to bring inflation back down sooner.
Now, in terms of inflation, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers says it's not yet mission accomplished, as Australians are still facing pressures from the cost of living. Now, we've also got some new figures today on Budget Eve looking at economic growth, and the forecast for that has been revised down to 2% for next financial year, and 6 months ago it was looking like it would be 2.25%. So a slight change there as well. So those are some of the numbers that we will see in tomorrow night's federal budget. In terms of policy, of course, over recent weeks and recent months, we've been getting a real drip feed of information, I suppose, from the government about what will be in that detail tomorrow. Things like changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts, the way HEX debt works, and also assistance for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence, which of course has been such a big topic this year as well. But all of those details will be confirmed tomorrow after the lockup finishes and the Treasurer gets on his feet at 7:30 tomorrow night.
Thanks, Evelyn. Lawyers for Chris Dawson, convicted of killing his wife Lynette in 1982, have opened their case in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal. Dawson was convicted of murder in 2022, but his lawyers are arguing there's reasonable doubt about his guilt. Sean Tarrant-Goodwin is outside the court and joins us now. Hi, Sean. So what's the court heard so far today?
Well, Ros, we've started to get a picture of the case that Chris Dawson's lawyers are bringing in this appeal over the conviction of the killing of his wife, Lynette, in 1982. The senior public defender in New South Wales, Belinda Rigg SC, opened the case, beginning to raise some of the arguments that her office will bring as to about doubt as to his guilt over that killing. They started by talking about the plausibility of the claim raised by Chris Dawson that Lynette left the family home of her own volition at the start of 1982. That was a key feature of the criminal trial in 2022, where Chris Dawson claimed that Lynette had left of her own volition. He claimed to her family that she had corresponded with him after doing so. And given that the judge in the trial in 2022 concluded that she was dead, they found that that therefore Chris Dawson's claim that she had been corresponding with him was doubtful and therefore incriminating for him. The lawyers also raised the issue of the long period of time between Lynette Dawson's disappearance and the conviction over her murder in 2022. That was a four-year gap in time, which meant that therefore there would be doubt as to the evidence in that case. The trial is running over 3 days, and we're expected to get more of a picture of how it will play out in the coming days.
Thanks, John. A man has been charged with murder after the body of a man in his 60s was found in a car park in Wollongong CBD on the New South Wales south coast. The body was found in a stairwell of the multi-level Wollongong train station car park yesterday morning. Police have arrested a 37-year-old man and charged him with murder. He'll face Wollongong local court today. Israel has told tens of thousands more Palestinians to leave Rafah as it steps up its military offensive in southern Gaza, despite warnings from allies, including the US. It also says dozens of trucks delivering aid have now crossed into northern Gaza after it opened another crossing. The UN is reporting more than 300,000 Palestinians have fled Rafah as Israel expands its offensive. And overnight, the Egyptian government announced it's joining South Africa's genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. For more on these latest developments, we're joined by our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons. Hi again, John. So the attack on Rafah is going ahead despite warnings from Israel's allies. But is the US now getting tougher with Israel?
Well, Ros, they're talking a bit tougher, but not really. I mean, one shipment has been postponed, but tens of thousands of bombs have been sent there, and they're not actually deciding to stop them completely. So although they're saying, tougher things, like the president has said some months ago now, the bombing's indiscriminate and that Israel has to do more to spare civilians, it's been, the killing of tens of thousands of civilians. So Israel is proceeding regardless of what the United States is saying, which is quite remarkable given the US is the major supporter and funder of Israel.
You've written a piece on the ABC website where you've outlined how precarious the situation the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in now. How is that impacting this continued assault on Rafah?
Well, basically, Benjamin Netanyahu needs the support of the far-right, the extremists in his own cabinet to survive politically, and they are implacably opposed to a Palestinian state, as he is, and to a ceasefire in the war. So even, though the President of the United States is pressuring for a ceasefire, for an end, for a two-state solution, Benjamin Netanyahu is just saying no, 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 3 no's, and the US is really doing nothing about it. And it goes back decades to Ronald Reagan, since the US President actually thumped the table and said over Beirut, when the Israelis were killing a lot of civilians in Beirut, and President Reagan said to Menachem Begin, stop, or else we don't supply you with further weapons. The US is sort of saying, oh, maybe one shipment is postponed, but, Netanyahu is, there's people at that cabinet table that we're seeing now who can bring him down tomorrow, particularly 2 of the far right-wing ministers, Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, and Benjamin Netanyahu is interested in his own political survival more than anything, in my view.
Egypt has now joined then South Africa's genocide case against Israel in the ICJ. Egypt is one of the mediators involved in these ceasefire.
That's right.
Talks. What difference will all this make?
Well, I think it's very serious because Egypt has had a decades-long peace agreement with Israel, one of Israel's biggest supporters in the Arab world, and for Egypt now to have decided to do this, it shows you the anger in the Arab world when moderate countries like Egypt, which are very close to the US, rely on the US for military aid as well, are saying we will prosecute Israel for possible genocide. Like Jordan as well. Jordan has talked about another massacre of the Palestinians is in the making, their foreign minister said recently. Failure to prevent the massacre will be an indelible stain on the international community. Too many states have been allowed enough. That's Jordan. So Israel's losing not just 143, including Australia, who voted against it at the UN in favour of the Palestinian resolution, but they're losing the key allies like Jordan and Egypt. They're becoming very isolated.
Thanks, John. Catastrophic flooding is wreaking havoc in multiple countries, with authorities in Afghanistan, Indonesia and Brazil continuing to struggle with torrential rain. In Afghanistan's north, more than 300 people have died and thousands have been injured after unusually heavy falls saw rivers burst their banks. 2,000 homes have been destroyed and roads have been cut to isolated regions most affected by the floods. Rivers of water and mud have torn through villages and devastated farmland.
We have no food, no drinking water, no shelter, no blankets, nothing at all. The floods have destroyed everything. Out of 42 houses, only 2 or 3 remain. The floods have destroyed the entire valley.
Well, we have some news just in, as you can see from the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The plane that we talked to reporter Giselle Wakatama that's been circling Newcastle Airport, just above the north coast of New South Wales, has made that emergency landing. We can see all seems to be safe. Certainly no need for the fire engines and emergency crews at this stage. If there had been need of them, I can see one approaching now, and it's just touched down by the look of it. It was carrying 3 people. Its landing gear fails to withdraw. This is actually applause from not just emergency crews, but many, many people workers who came to watch what was happening. These emergencies have been on for hours now. The plane was circling the airport, trying to burn off fuel, and you can see that is the scene there now. It was potentially a very dangerous situation. It made a couple of attempts to make that emergency landing, but it had to go this time, and it did so successfully in what's called a belly landing, and I'm sure this will be used as a textbook example for people learning how to fly a plane. We'll go back to our reporter, Giselle Wakatama, play shortly to get the atmosphere now that news from Newcastle Airport is good. The federal court has chosen not to extend a temporary order for the social media company X to hide videos of the Sydney church stabbing globally on its platform. National technology reporter Ange Lavapierre is with me in the studio. Hi there, Ange. So take us through the federal court's ruling.
Yeah, so we had a judgment this morning after...
Touch. Only natural diamonds. Mason Jewelry.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. here in Singapore. You're watching CNA, the headlines this hour. India sets the stage for phase 4 of its mammoth election as the world's largest electoral exercise moves into its final month. Polling underway in 96 seats across 10 states and union territories. The states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana will be voting, with polls also open in Srinagar, the capital of Jammu and Kashmir. A shock reshuffle in Russia. President Vladimir Putin removes close ally Sergei Shoigu as defense minister. The change widely seen as the biggest shakeup to Russia's military leadership more than 2 years into the war in Ukraine. Andrei Belousov, an economist and former deputy prime minister, has been proposed as Shoigu's replacement. Israel pushes deeper into Rafah as it ups pressure on Hamas, but U.S. officials warn against a major ground offensive as they clarify President Biden's pledge to pause a weapons shipment.
He doesn't want to see American weapons used in that kind of operation. That's not to say that he is going to abandon Israel or cut them off from weapons. He was focused on a particular operation that he doesn't believe will succeed in defeating Hamas and that will cause grievous harm.
That's the latest from the CNA newsroom.
This is Asia First.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock here in Singapore on a Monday. I'm Arnold Gay. Our top story this hour, a shock reshuffle in Russia. President Vladimir Putin removes close ally Sergei Shoigu as defense minister. The change, widely seen as the biggest shakeup to Russia's military leadership more than 2 years into the war in Ukraine. Andrei Belousov, an economist and former deputy prime minister, has been proposed as Shoigu's replacement.
I'm Teresa Tang. Also this morning, Israel pushes deeper into Rafah as it ups pressure on Hamas, but U.S. officials warn against a major ground offensive as they clarify President Biden's pledge to pause a weapons shipment.
He doesn't want to see American weapons used in that kind of operation. That's not to say that he is going to abandon Israel.
The world's largest electoral exercise moves into its final month. 96 seats across 10 states and union territories on the ballot today in phase 4 of voting in India.
I'm Elizabeth Neal with your business news. Mixed trade here in Asia Pacific as investors gear up for another busy week with key data out of the world's top 2 economies. Inflation figures out of the U.S. set to be the first major test for markets after the U.S. Federal Reserve took a dovish stance on interest rates. Plus, Chinese authorities reportedly kick off plans to sell $140 billion of long-dated bonds as Beijing ramps up spending to stimulate the economy.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has moved to replace Sergei Shoigu as defense minister in a surprise reshuffle.
Mr. Putin has instead chosen a civilian, Andrei Belousov, to take over the role. The move comes 2 years into the Ukraine war. The Kremlin was quick to emphasize that Mr. Shoigu is being given a new position that's technically senior to his defense ministry role, thus ensuring continuity.
Mr. Shoigu was defense minister since 2012, making him one of Russia's longest serving in that post. A staunch Putin ally, Mr. Shoigu will now become secretary of the Security Council and will also have responsibilities for the military-industrial complex. It's the most significant change to Russia's military command since the war started in February 2022. While the new defense minister pick, Andrei Belousov, is a former deputy prime minister who specializes in economics. The Kremlin says it's vital to align defense spending with the country's interests, and that's why President Putin now wants a civilian with an economic background in the defense ministry job. The Kremlin said a person more open to innovation will be the one victorious on the battlefield. Mr. Belousov has played an important role in overseeing Russia's drone program. The change, also likely to be seen as an attempt by President Putin to subject defense spending to greater scrutiny. Observers say the shakeup indicates the president is doubling down on the Ukraine war and wants to harness more of Russia's economy for the military.
The reshuffle comes as Russia opens a new front in its conflict with Ukraine. Moscow troops smashed into the Kharkiv region last week. This opens a northeastern front in the 27-month war that has long been waged in the south and east. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city and just 30 kilometers from the Russian border. The Russian military says it has seized control of at least 9 border villages, but Kyiv has said it's repelling the attacks and battling for control of the settlements. Ukraine's military chief acknowledges that his forces in Kharkiv are facing a difficult situation, but says they are doing all they can to hold the line. President Volodymyr Zelensky says disrupting Moscow's plans for the region is his top priority. Now, some of that fighting has spilled over to Russia's Belgorod region. Emergency workers say they have rescued a man alive from rubble of an apartment block after being struck by fragments of a downed Ukrainian missile. Russian media reported that at least 13 people were killed. The defense ministry said its air defense systems destroyed 6 attack drones and 2 ballistic missiles that were targeting Russian territory. Kyiv typically does not comment on attacks inside Russia.
Israel's military is pushing deeper into Rafah, which is supposedly the last stronghold of Hamas.
But soldiers are grappling with militants regrouping in the north. Rafah remains Israel's main focus for now, with forces making further inroads into the region, forcing more than 300,000 people to flee, about a third of the population there, as the death toll in the war crosses the 35,000 mark, according to Gaza's health ministry.
The Israeli Prime Minister defied global calls to hold off on Rafah, vowing at a Memorial Day ceremony to press on for those killed in the October 7th attack.
כולם בלי יוצא מן הכלל אמרו לי, גם אלה, קטועי הגפיים. הם אמרו לי, רוח העם מרימה אותנו למעלה. תמשיכו, הלאה, עד הניצחון. וכך נעשה.
His troops are meantime back in battle in northern Gaza. Hamas has apparently regrouped in places that the military cleared months ago. The resurgence is something not lost on Washington. It says Israel lacks a credible plan to safeguard civilians in Rafah and accuses the Israelis of violating humanitarian law.
There are instances where they've acted inconsistent with their obligations under international humanitarian law. Those investigations continue both by us and by Israel. We also haven't seen a plan for what happens the day after this war in Gaza ends. Because right now, the trajectory that Israel is on is even if it goes in and takes heavy action in Rafah, there will still be thousands of armed Hamas left.
The aid situation remains in limbo. Israel announced it has opened a new crossing in the north at Western Erez, but the UN says it has not received any aid in days after the other two crossings in the south were shut when troops entered Rafah.
The US has made another attempt to rein in Israel over attacking Rafah. The security chiefs of both sides discussed Washington's proposals for an alternative course of action. Sally Patterson tells us more.
It's another sign on Sunday that Israel and the United States might not quite be in alignment when it comes to the ongoing war in Gaza. We've seen a statement released by the White House which said that a conversation took place between National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his Israeli counterpart. Now, in that statement, it said that the two of them discussed President Joe Biden's condolences on Israel's Memorial Day and stressed that this was the first time that day also included the victims of Hamas's October 7th attack, which saw more than 1,000 Israelis killed. It also discussed the ongoing situation with hostages who remain inside Gaza. And the two of them discussed the offensive in Rafah, with Sullivan stressing that whilst the US remained ironclad in its support of Israel and its security, it did not support its approach to Rafah and the offensive there. Here's what he had to say.
He doesn't want to see American weapons used in that kind of operation. That's not to say that he is going to abandon Israel or cut them off from weapons. He was focused on a particular operation that he doesn't believe will succeed in defeating Hamas and that will cause grievous harm.
Now, the Biden administration has come under criticism from particularly some Republican lawmakers for causing its shipment of bombs to Israel in response to the offensive in Rafah, with some of them saying that actually Israel needs to do whatever it can to ensure its security as the only Jewish state. Israel maintains that Rafah is Hamas's last stronghold in the region.
Tensions growing between Israel and Egypt, with Cairo saying it intends to formally join South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. That case accuses Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Sarah Coates explains the significance of Cairo's move.
This is very significant, really, given that Israel relies on Egypt as an ally and also really for security reasons to really stop smuggling attempts over from Egypt down on that southern Gazan border, bringing in things like weapons. So what this could really do is leave Israel more open and leave an area for Hamas to strengthen. Now, what it really shows here is a lot of desperation from the Egyptians. We have been hearing time and time again these concerns from Cairo of potentially tens of thousands of internally displaced Palestinians pushing over that border from the southern Rafah area into Egypt, really creating a lot of security concerns for the Egyptians. Now, it also comes on top of this as an unnamed official in Cairo has come out to tell the Associated Press that right now this expanded military operation that is ongoing in Rafah is threatening this decades-long peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. So certainly all of this, when you look at it, is really a fairly significant diplomatic blow for Israel.
India will be voting in the fourth phase of parliamentary elections today. Polling is set to open in 96 constituencies across 10 states and union territories later this hour. The entire states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana will be voting today. Polling will also take place in Indian-administered Kashmir. This is the first major election in Jammu and Kashmir since the region was stripped of its special status and statehood in August 2019. Well, the first three phases of the Lok Sabha elections have already decided the fate of 284 MPs. The fifth phase will be held next Monday and the sixth on the 25th of May before the election heads towards the seventh and final phase on June 1st. Counting of votes will take place on the 4th of June. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is seeking a rare third term in office.
Jammu and Kashmir's capital, Srinagar, is heading to the polls today. CNA's Neha Punya tells us about the region's tumultuous history and how that has shaped its politics.
Kashmir is often described as heaven on earth, a picturesque region known for its iconic houseboats and ski slopes. But this region in India's north has also been home to an armed insurgency against Indian rule for several decades. It's also a flashpoint between New Delhi and Islamabad and has been for more than 6 decades. India and Pakistan govern Kashmir in parts but lay claim to it in full. 10 million people live in Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir and over 4 million in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Both nations have even fought 2 wars for full control of this Muslim-majority region. But in 2019, already strained ties between the two nations broke down after Prime Minister Modi's government revoked Kashmir's special status, bringing the region directly under New Delhi's control. The special status was granted to Kashmir when it joined the Union of India following independence from the British. It allowed the region to have its own constitution and make its own rules on residency and owning property, and also barred Indians from outside the region from settling here. Mr. Modi has been citing that revocation as his government's biggest success in the last 5 years. He claims the move ended unrest in Kashmir, brought development to the region, and was welcomed by locals. But many here disagree and want that special status reinstated. And despite Mr. Modi's claim that Kashmiris wanted that special status revoked, his party is not contesting any of the 3 seats polling in the Kashmir region. Experts say had Modi's BJP contested from these seats, defeat would have meant a loss of face and blunted Modi's claim. But BJP leaders have been talking about bringing Pakistan-administered Kashmir under India's control, a claim local leaders say is bound to hike regional tensions and invite retaliation from the Pakistani army. The fact remains that even after Kashmir's special status was revoked, it remains one of the most militarized regions in the world. And in this election, which is the first major poll to be held here since Kashmir's special status was changed, experts say voter turnout will be a key indication of local sentiment. In 2019, voter turnout here was less than 14%. Neha Punia, CNA, Srinagar in Kashmir.
And Neha Punia will join us later this hour from Jammu and Kashmir's capital, Srinagar, as the polls open there.
Well, as Indian voters in Kashmir go to the polls, protests in the Pakistan-administered part of the disputed region have turned violent.
Demonstrations over the past 3 days against the rising cost of living have left one police officer dead, reportedly lynched by protesters. 90 others were also injured in the clashes.
The protests are spearheaded by traders who demonstrated against inflation, high taxation, and a power shortage. But it soon turned into a movement for rights and liberty, with thousands of protesters shouting slogans demanding freedom.
हम ये चाहते हैं कि जो यहाँ से इन पानी से बिजली पैदा हो रही है, इस पानी जो बिजली है हमें रियायती दरों पर दी जाए, और जो जिस पानी से पंजाब में सिंध में गंदम पैदा हो रही है वो आटा वो गंदम हमें सब्सिडाइज दी जाए, और हम उस वक्त तक रोडों पर खड़े हैं जब तक हमारी ये जो जायज कानूनी और अखलाकी बात पूरी नहीं होती, हम अपनी जरूरत से पीछे नहीं हटेंगे.
Pakistani security forces carried out a massive crackdown on Friday, arresting dozens who called for strikes. The government in Pakistan-administered Kashmir also imposed Section 144, which prohibits the gathering of 4 or more people.
Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has warned against the violent protests, saying there should be, quote, absolutely no tolerance for taking the law in one's own hands and damaging government properties. President Asif Ali Zardari convened a meeting yesterday looking for a way to quell the agitations.
Pakistan is currently embroiled in a national debt crisis. The government has billions in outstanding payment due this year. It's now seeking at least $6 billion in new loans from the International Monetary Fund. Let's look at Asian markets, starting the week on a cautious note as investors await the release of key inflation readings out of the US, which may reshape their pricing of rate cuts this year. Plus, South Korea doubles down on chip investments as competition on the sector intensifies. We look at a new support package it's preparing to support homegrown chip companies.
Tensions on the rise between Niger and Benin. As a border dispute rages on, Benin has prevented its landlocked neighbor from using its port to start its first crude oil exports to China, a deal worth $400 million. Niger's Prime Minister on Saturday said the blockade violates trade agreements between the two countries and with Niamey's Chinese partners. He said Niger could not fully reopen its borders with Benin for security reasons, a comment that has further escalated the dispute. In response, Cotonou says it will only back down once Niamey reopens its borders to goods coming from Benin and normalizes relations. Things have been strained between the two countries since a military coup in Niger last year. Barbara Nabulo arriving at a hospital in Mbali in eastern Uganda. She was diagnosed with the inherited blood disorder sickle cell when she was 2 weeks old. Now 37, she's become an inspirational counsellor to fellow sufferers. They never thought of me as important, like someone who'd grow up or someone who's supposed to get an education. Because they used to tell my mother that people like me don't grow, we can't go to school, and we don't produce children. So as a child, my mother looked after me, and she stopped taking me to the hospital when I was 12 years old. So, when I was 12, she'd put me in a taxi from our village, and she'd tell me to go to the clinic. The disorder causes the normally round, red blood cells to become hard and crescent-shaped, clogging the flow of blood. This often leads to infections, excruciating pain, and other complications.
Before he was 2 years back, he was falling sick, but we didn't know which disease that. So we confirmed when he was 2 years in Africa. Then from there we started struggling with him, struggling up to now.
The only cure for the pain is a bone marrow transplant or gene therapy, beyond the reach of most patients. But there is a drug that can reduce periods of severe pain and other complications.
So I would say wonder drug. It has changed the course of managing children with sickle cell. We used to be so frustrated, you know. You care for a child, then they reach like 12 years, and they get so many complications. And even you start wishing and saying, this child. So because of that trauma, hydroxyurea has now changed it. Like it improves on the quality of life of these patients.
She says messages of hope from people like Nabulu help those who feel discouraged or worried that sickle cell is a death sentence. Her father says he's proud of her.
During the time when I was born, if someone had sickle cell, people look at just being sickly like that. But I think up to this moment, people are getting some life due to this radio information.
Nabulo is mother to twin daughters and her son, but despite positive trends, many like her continue to face discrimination.
The US has said that Israel may have violated international humanitarian law in the summary of a report delivered to Congress. It was said that the finding of reasonable evidence to conclude that Israel had breached international law protecting civilians in the way it conducted its war against Hamas. This is the strongest criticism made towards Israel from the US yet. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the US wants to see Israel move the civilians away from the battlefield.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.